Welcome to Elements of a Successful Scope. Although there are a wide range of different terms that can be used, the scope is what we are hiring the proposer to do. We want a good description of this to ensure that we have a solid competition amongst the competing proposers. Another reminder is that the scope goes in combination with a description of our current conditions or our current state environment. We want to cover both of these pieces of information in the scope section of the RFP. The analogy we used in the previous video, which discussed the current conditions, was going from point A to point B, where point A is the current conditions, but point B is the scope. So in this video, we're going to cover point B, that scope, and that's a description of our future destination as a project. This should be focused primarily on the results and the outcomes of what success would look like for us in this project. A reminder too is that we're painting that picture of success. It doesn't mean that we are perfect, that we have every minute detail defined in the perfect sense. We're trying to paint the overall picture of what is a successful outcome for our agency and for our state as a whole. Now, the content and structure of that scope should cover these 5 key areas. And let's go through them one by one. So again, describing our future outcomes. In all 5 of these areas, we want to make sure that we are clear and concise, we are accurate, and we are complete. The main takeaway message with this is that we don't need pages and pages and pages of content. We can do all of this in a concise fashion to make the information easily digestible for the proposing community. So first up, number 1, our overview and purpose. We will concisely describe what the project is about and why we are doing it. So the overview and purpose should have a very brief summary that's easy for external proposers to understand. This could be as simple as 1 to 2 sentences or 1 to 2 paragraphs at absolute maximum, describing in simple terms what the project is all about. Avoid technical language, jargon, details, or specifics. Keep it succinct and to the point, and make it understandable such that a middle school or high school student could understand what the project is all about. Don't get into all the weeds here. Brief summary is all that's needed. Next, describe your goals, objectives, motivation. What are the drivers of this project? What are the key aspects of success? Why are we doing this? Provide that background. And if possible, maybe even include a few quantifiable metrics of how we are going to measure that successful outcome. What should be accomplished in measurable terms by the end of that project? So that's the first section. Number 2 is our future state. We're going to describe departures from our current conditions. And again, current conditions is point A, the starting point for the project. That was described in the previous video. So go refer to that for more details on current conditions. Now, number 2 here, future state, will be our departures from that. So provide an overview of the services or the project or the technologies that are to be provided. Again, clear and concise. This is a place to specifically document deliverables that are expected from the proposing firms. You may have figures or diagrams or references that support this information. You may even want to bundle these into an appendix of the RFP. You don't want too much information here in the upfront scope. Also, for projects that may have more to do with technology and data upgrades, make sure you address what that transition period looks like from point A to point B before you're up and fully running at a steady state environment with the executed projects. Number 3 in your scope is the itemized requirements. This is where you're going to describe your mandatory and desired items. First, you want this itemized list to be organized, put it into major categories. I would attach exhibits if needed to make things clear. And you do not need to require proposing firms to respond to each itemized requirement in writing. So in other words, do not ask them to describe how their firm or their product meets every single one of these. Make that part of the rest of the proposal. Don't make them give an itemized written response to all of this. Of course, the itemized requirements can be different in terms of how they're organized based upon what project type it is. If it's design and construction, then yeah, you're going to have plans drawings, specifications. If it's IT, if it's software, they're more likely to be itemized and have a longer list. And then any type of service in between, requirements should be stated in a list form with major categories grouped together. The key point for your itemized requirements is this: be sure to differentiate between mandatory and desired requirements. Mandatory requirements are must-haves. If a proposer misses any individual one of these requirements, then they are eliminated from consideration. So these are the things that you cannot live without. If any one of them is missing, that proposal is disqualified automatically. So there should not be that many mandatories. It should really truly be the things you must have. Everything else then becomes desired requirements. These are not a cause for disqualification. If any one of the items is missed, maybe the rest of the requirements are still met. You don't want to disqualify for these, but your goal is to compete for as many of these as possible. So this is really where the competition lies in the proposal. So mandatory and desired are the best ways to differentiate between your requirements. Please try to avoid having more definitions than this. Sometimes folks will get into mandatory, desired, and nice to have, or maybes, or bells and whistles. Try to keep it simple. Mandatory, and then compete the rest with the desireds. If things are truly nice to have, or extras, or superfluous, you don't even need to mention them. Those can just be value adds that get brought up by the proposers in the response. And if they're just nice to have, you don't care about them that much, then why document them at all? Just focus on the things that are mandatory and desired. Keep it concise to focus on those two critical categories. The rest is just extra information. Number 4 within your scope are your schedule and budget constraints. In general, it is advisable to publish your schedule expectations and your budget expectations. All internal agencies should consult with their procurement professionals around this and when it is best to publish each of these items. But almost in every case, the schedule should be clearly and transparently identified, especially if there are different phases that are to be described in that schedule. It's not always just one scheduled date. Sometimes it's different phases and milestones. That takes some description to keep it clear and understandable for outside entities to understand, because your proposers don't always know the intricacies of what's happening with the states and with the terminology that's being used. So keep the schedule clearly described. The budget should also be described. That helps to understand whether or not the scope is reasonable within the budgetary constraints. It will allow for proposals to come back with more solutions and budget optimization ideas. Again, schedule and budget constraints should be discussed in collaboration with the procurement professionals before the RFP goes out, something that should be reviewed. In general, though, when publishing this information, be clear about the information. Don't be fuzzy. So for example, if you have chosen to publish the budget, then give the actual budget in simple terms, right? Here's our consulting budget. Here's our spends. Here's our annual costs and our one-time startup costs for a software project or so forth. Don't give a range. Don't make it fuzzy. Don't make it unknown. All of that leads to confusion. Either publish the information directly, or you're better off just not publishing at all. But our recommendation is publish the specific information. That is typically what's going to be best. And the same thing for schedule. Ranges are not advisable. Give milestones and specific start and stop times. That's going to be a better help to your proposers. It will keep things more apples to apples as well. And then number 5 of our scope, unique considerations. This is going to be things that are different or unusual about us as a client compared to other typical clients that these proposers may see. So what might be unusual about our environment that we want to call attention to? Make sure these things are not missed in the proposals. You don't want things to be overlooked. A big area also is unknowns or assumptions that are built into our scope. Even though we may not be unique as a client, we might be somewhat unique in the sense of what we do or do not know definitively in our scope. So if there's areas that are unknowns or assumptions, identify them here. Refer back a couple videos prior where we talked about using the phrase of, for the purposes of the proposal, proposer should assume X. That's a great way to handle various unknowns or assumptions. And that clearly identifies those things as being assumptions that have to be verified later. And then, of course, any supplemental information should be identified as an attachment or as an exhibit at the back end of your RFP. Don't bog down the scope document with too many pages. So in summary, you have these 5 sections of the scope. That overview and purpose should be no more than 1 page in length. Your future state should be fairly succinct as well, 1 to maybe 3 pages maximum. Your itemized requirements are organized and are going to be focused on your mandatory and desired items. It doesn't have to get into all the other nice to haves. Published schedule and budget constraints, that's usually something that fits on a single page. And then unique considerations, usually a page or 2 as well. Again, the reminder and conclusion here is that scope also is in combination with current conditions. This describes point A of the starting point, and then point B of where we're going, focused primarily on the outcomes of what we need to achieve to have a successful project.